being able to have access to the technology while being at school at home, and then also being able to just embark on the website or emailing people. So when you're able to have access to, creative outlets on the internet, it gave me really a head start in ways that I could not have gotten if I was in that public school, because, K12 enabled me to do that.
In today's rapidly evolving world, where virtual education is more prominent than ever, we're witnessing a new generation of students who aren't just preparing for careers, they're launching them before they've even graduated. How exactly are virtual classrooms transforming into launch pads for the next generation of entrepreneurs?
For me, the blog was really simply an outlet to overcome a lot of that bullying and really have a safe space for me to feel like I could be myself.
Today, I'm joined by Alexa Curtis, a prime example of youth success in the digital age. From starting a fashion blog at 12 to becoming a mental health advocate, Disney host, and serial entrepreneur, Alexa has turned online opportunities into tangible success. She's here to discuss the link between online education and entrepreneurial achievement, and to show just how far today's students can go. Alexa, welcome to the show. Alexa, once again, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Look, there's a lot I want to unpack with you. I followed your career. I followed your serial entrepreneurship efforts, but I was really fascinated with the fact that you always talk about starting at 12, but that was the result of some bullying. Let's talk about that, because the whole notion of bullying has taken on a different dimension these days, but it also can be a motivator. Share a little bit about that experience.
Well, it's so nice to be asked that question and be able to share it, because I assume you have probably a lot of parents who listen to this show. And in this day and age, bullying is so prevalent with social media. Back when I started the blog, I was 12. I was in middle school at the time, and I always was kind of the odd one out. I was not confident or familiar at all with how to be an entrepreneur at the time when I started it. So for me, the blog was really simply an outlet to overcome a lot of that bullying and really have a safe space for me to feel like I could be myself. And so when I started it, this was before influencing and TikTok and Instagram was a thing. I just loved to write. And so for any parent or kid who's watching this, I definitely think if you can find at a younger age something that really fuels your inspiration, that you can hopefully make that into a career.
It's interesting. I talk about bullying because in many of the online schools that we run at K12, in fact, indeed, many of the online schools that started were the result of the fact that parents needed an alternative educational environment for their children as a result of the bullying. And as you said, now it's gone to a whole different level. But the fact that there are opportunities for kids to learn, grow, and thrive is still an important factor. Why a fashion blog? Because you were going through all this, but you decided to land on a blog that really, is somewhat out of the ordinary for a 12-year-old at that time.
Yeah, and one of the reasons the predominant reason that I transferred to online school was because of the bullying and because I was doing so poorly in my public school. And so online school was really the only option for me. So I was so grateful to have found that. But for me, fashion at the time, it was really just an outlet. I loved fashion. I grew up with no money, no connections. So it wasn't like I was wearing high-end designer clothing, but I just found it to be something that I think I felt like I could perhaps escape the reality of what I was going through in school and the lack of friends that I had and all of my insecurities. And so at the time when I started it, there was a little bit of a what's the right word? There was a community, I'd say, of younger fashion bloggers and these young girls who were doing similar things to me. And while I would go to school and have this insecure, scared personality there, when I would be able to get home and write and talk to these other girls who I thought were also a bit different, is where I was able to equally, I think, balance out my fears when I would go to traditional public school prior to starting online school.
You know, it's interesting, and we'll get off the bullying thing, but I do think it's important because, as you mentioned, a lot of parents are experiencing this. My youngest son went through that. And you used the phrase "a bit different," and I think a bit different is now more normal.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be celebrated. And this idea of trying to conform to the crowd, it really is an old kind of reality that just shouldn't exist. But, you know, when you started this blog, did you have any idea of where you wanted to go with it, or was just the outlet that worked at the time?
No, I had no idea. I had no expectations. I had no assumptions. It was literally like the way that somebody decides to play volleyball or run track in high school is the way that I decided to pursue that blog. There was no thought process behind it, but it really gave me the creative outlet I think I needed to start on the entrepreneurial journey. But at that age, I mean, I had never even heard of the word entrepreneur. So I think I remember like Oprah and Ellen, but I had no expectation that it would become anything.
Let's talk about the online education experience because, again, when we think of something that's a bit different, traditional education has been in place for a couple hundred years. Folks are used to the bell schedule, showing up, sitting still, listen to a teacher lecture, and then, you know, have some social interaction during the breaks. But online school is a lot different. Talk about that experience, particularly as you move from the traditional environment and getting used to the freedom and difference in an online educational situation.
I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to start by saying I think a bit of a fun fact that actually I remember so clearly from the day that I decided to transfer to online school, and I had the support of my mom, and I went into the guidance counselor in that public high school that I was at, and I had started the blog at this time, and some people in the school were aware of it, and I remember telling him that I was going to transfer to online school, and I just remember verbatim him looking at me, and I mean, I think I was 15 or 16, so quite frankly, it was an inappropriate thing to say to a young person, but it was such a traditional, boring mindset, and he just said, if you do this, you're going to fail. And I just remember I never forgot him saying that to me, and I've never seen him since, but it just stuck with me. And so for me, I think because I was so, at that age, now I had the blog for maybe 3 or 4 years, so the entrepreneurial side of me, and the CEO, I think that was that budding CEO, being in online school really allowed me to embrace that. I remember many times being at home while my mom was at work and having to deal with, you know, what do you do with this time in the middle of the day now if you finish school sooner than it would when you go to regular school and you've got like gym class and then lunch and then a break. You know, when you're at home doing it, you're able to condense it into what really should be the amount of time you spend on school during the day. And so I had a few years in between moving out and having done online school to really understand that kind of schedule I had to create for myself. But I think because I had the website and this career starting on the side, I personally didn't struggle with the time management. I think I remember maybe a few days where I was like, what do I do? Like I was just a bit bored with, you know, not having something to do every hour from 9 to 3. But then I really started to get into a really good routine. I remember I started getting really into going to the gym and then finding other extracurricular activities and being able to start traveling a bit more and having the flexibility to go to Fashion Week. So once I was in the groove, it really worked for me.
You know, what's interesting, I'm obviously struck by the way that teacher responded to you. But we like to say that online learning is not for everyone, but it should be available for anyone. Because COVID showed us that while some students struggled a little bit in the online environment, a lot of that was based on the fact that teachers and administrators really weren't adept at teaching in an online setting. But it also showed that many kids thrived, and it is something that is part of the new learning approach and learning modalities that should be available. Let me ask you this. You went from your fashion blog, you were a Disney host, you're an entrepreneur. Talk about the online experience and how it helped fuel some of your future success.
Well, do you mean like posting online or which part of it?
Just the online educational experience.
Oh, okay. Well, it was instrumental. I mean, number one for me, I think that being able to have access to the technology while being at school at home, and then also being able to just embark on the website or emailing people. Whereas when you're in a traditional school, right, it's almost so not acceptable, as that guidance counselor kind of proved, to do something different or embark outside of that traditional mold. So when you're able to have access to, creative outlets on the internet, it gave me really a head start in ways that I could not have gotten if I was in that public school, because, K12 enabled me to do that. I never had any judgment. I never dealt with competition with other kids, because it allows you, to creatively find yourself, but then have other activities on the side where you can connect and whatnot with people. And so I find that was what was really helpful for me, was being able to look at this computer and look at the internet as a tool, not a lifeline, but really a tool to embark on education-wise opportunities as well as career-wise ones.
Now, you talked about time management earlier, and one of the concerns that parents have expressed about the online educational experience is that a traditional setting allows for better time management because you're almost guided and directed by a teacher or school staff as to what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it. As you said, though, and it works for many kids, to be able to have the flexibility to balance your time is important. Talk a little bit about that balance, particularly as it relates to balancing your time management to do your work and at the same time fuel your entrepreneurial needs.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I will say that while I went through the process of being on online school, unfortunately, my mom had to work as well as my dad. So I didn't necessarily have parents who were able to be super active in the schooling side of things. So it really made me quite mature from a young age, and it gave me a lot of flexibility to focus on the website. That being said, if you're a parent of a kid who doesn't have that thing like I had, which was the website, I do think that there needs to be a bit more structure. And perhaps when I say there needs to be, that may just need to be looking in the community, looking at local things where you can get involved, because obviously the goal of online school is not for this young person to do school for an hour a day and then watch TV. There's no part of me that ever did that when I was doing online school, and that's not the goal. The goal is that perhaps if you are a bit of an outside of the box thinker like I am, that this is going to catapult you into more success. And so if you haven't yet figured out what that side hustle or motivation is, maybe you don't have the blog yet, right? Then you just need to be strategic with finding things that still get you around other people, that still get you outside of the house. I'm a big advocate for young people just trying things. If you try something and you hate it, try something else. But as long as there's something every day aside from school that is consistent, some form of activity or learning something, I think that's really how you stay grounded when you're going to be embarking on this without a teacher standing in front of you saying, this is how to do this every day.
Now, I have one more question before I ask you some questions we got from K12 parents. I have some specific questions that I want you to respond to. But in terms of skill development, what are some of the skills that you think are important for students to develop, particularly as they move into this digital age, and particularly if they want to become entrepreneurs?
My dad is in sales, so growing up, I always heard him doing things like cold calling, and I saw the waters of what it's like to be rejected. in business. Now I work with a lot of young people nowadays, and I can say a common theme is that because of the internet, because of social media, people do not want to pick up the phone. They don't know how to have proper face-to-face interactions with people because they're so hooked on the phone, yet it's all text, right? And so I would say that the adults, anyone 26, 27, right plus, needs to kind of teach this generation how to properly have those skills because they're not learning it from really anyone. So I would say definitely being aware of how to have those conversational skills. And then I would also say definitely, finding that way to utilize the internet without using it as a lifeline. Instead of the scrolling, there's a term called produce but don't consume. And I really live by that because I do think 99% of what you see on the internet is not good and definitely not good for the development of a young person's brain. And so it's almost kind of turning the tables to how can you utilize whatever it is that you may think you're interested in, copywriting or writing or running, on the internet and produce stuff around it that can elevate your profile, but not let it define you in the sense of a career or a lifeline until, maybe it gets to that point or maybe it doesn't.
Produce, but don't consume. I love that. I also love the fact, Alexa, that you have your own periodic workshops and sessions where you train students and others on not just how to develop a brand or how to be an entrepreneur, but as you said, how to produce and not consume. So you should be commended for that. So look, this is my last question, Alexa, and I just am so impressed with your energy and the work you're doing. And I'm glad that many parents and students and, frankly, people who participate in the K12 system around the country are able to hear you. But going back to your education, how it fueled your entrepreneurship, what advice would you give to students who want to start their own businesses while still in school? And you know that reality firsthand.
Well, my first piece of advice would be to find some form of a mentor. When I was starting, I would email a lot of people, but I didn't realize how important it was to create that sense of a circle early on, because you may not think of it when you're 12, 13, 14, but if you really do decide to take entrepreneurship seriously, those early relationships you create may be the people who end up investing in your first company or being that support system if you embark on this slightly crazy career path that entrepreneurship is. So I'd say to align yourself with some form of a mentor. And then I would say one thing I like to tell every young person is to introduce yourself to 5 or 10 plus people a week. If you looked at the emails I was writing, I remember so clearly anytime that I would finish school for the day, I would always just introduce myself to people on emails when I was like 14. And I mean, they were grammatically incorrect and just really sloppy emails because I didn't know what I was doing, but it got me in the door with people in business just by introducing myself. And that's the way that I even ended up landing my own Disney show, was via cold email. So if you can find the confidence to reach out and introduce yourself to people every week, regardless of what you decide to do, entrepreneurship or business-wise, you're just going to set yourself apart from other people.
Alexa Curtis, appreciate all that you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to What I Want to Know. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you can explore other episodes and dive into our discussions on the future of education. And write a review of the show. I also encourage you to join the conversation and let me know what you want to know using hashtag WIWTK on social media. That's hashtag WIWTK. For more information on Stride and online education, visit stridelearning.com. I'm your host, Kevin P. Chavous. Thank you for joining What I Want to Know.